Welcome to the Grove Podcast, where we feature Evergreen members and their real-life stories of salvation, transformation, struggle, and hope. I'm Joy Gabbert, and today we have Warren Good. Welcome to the Grove.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As she said, I'm Warren Good, and I've been at Evergreen since the beginning, and it's been an enjoyable journey. Presently, I work in Awanas with the children. I work in the golf cart ministry, also in the greeting ministry, where we greet people at the different doors, and so I enjoy working with people and doing that type of thing.
Now, the thing that I want to get involved in, just because it looks so fun, is the golf cart ministry. What is that? Tell us what that is.
Okay. On that, like before a service, we will be, we have four golf carts that we'll drive around in the parking lot where people get out of the cars, and we'll offer them a ride to the door in the golf carts. And then after the service, we'll be up near the door where they exit and offer a ride back out to their cars.
Yeah. I think that's great, especially if it's raining or snowing or something. And
yes, for
our older senior adults, sometimes that's great ministry. And then also my kids, they love it. They love to try and catch a ride in the golf cart.
The children really love it. They love getting on the cart. So
yeah. I love even when it's cold out, you guys have like these rain shields that keep the heat in, which is really cool. Yes. I like that a lot. Anyway, so maybe I will start driving one. I mainly want to do it just to...
We can always use more drivers.
Yeah, but I'm afraid that I would just be zooming around and not actually picking anybody up. So maybe not. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and start listening to your story? So why don't you start us off with your childhood? What was little Warren Good like?
I became a Christian at the age of 6, and basically I was just a very obedient, good little kid. I followed Christ all of my life, from as a child and on up, and even in the church where I was. Once I was old enough to be like in the junior high or in the high school, I was active in the youth group and in the youth program. And so even throughout the high school and everything, I was still active in church and everything. So there was never a story of I fell away or moved away from the church or from Christ, and then a story of coming back to that. But I just never left. I stayed with Christ the whole time.
So then you grew up, and did you attend university, or what happened to you in your later teenage years after high school?
Okay, after high school, I started attending Friends University. I was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas, but that was where I was headed at the time, though I didn't go straight through.
Yeah. How come? How come you didn't go straight through?
The Vietnam War was going on during that time.
Okay.
And so between my sophomore and junior years of college, I joined the Marine Corps. And it was just a 2-year enlistment, so I knew, well, it won't be long, I'll be back out.
Yeah.
But I joined the Marine Corps at that point, went to boot camp, and then after that I did mortar school.
Well, tell us a little bit about boot camp, and because you said that you went to boot camp in California,
yes.
So this is away from home, away from the church that you knew and grew up in, and you know we're used to. So, were you able to go to church at all when you were at boot camp?
Yes, the life is very restricted in boot camp. They did allow us to go to chapel or to the chapel services that they had at the base, and it was just a very general type service. But I would go on Sunday mornings, and then you were back into the boot camp training. Now, once I was out of boot camp, then I was in infantry training. We could get off base on a weekend or on a day if they allowed us. I still went to the chapel service some. And then later, when I was back before I went to Vietnam, we were in jungle training, and I wanted to go to church. I remember one Sunday I told God, I want to go to church, a real church. And so I went into Oceanside, which was a little town right off of Camp Pendleton there in California. And I get into the town, and it's just a small town. I look around, there was no church available or visible. And I asked God, where do I go? And I felt him directing me to just start walking into a neighborhood this one direction. And I walked a little ways, and there was a steeple, and I just walked towards that steeple, and it was a Church of Christ. But it was a very meaningful experience for me. There was a young couple in there with children, and he kind of adopted me in a sense for the few months that I was there. It was just a very good Christian experience of getting to go to church and have a family relationship there.
Yeah. So, I mean, church was important to you. Your faith in the Lord was very important. And so how did you stay faithful while you were in Vietnam?
I remember I took my Bible with me. I don't remember seeing hardly any other Bibles there. One of the few people who had one, and so I would read my Bible. In fact, while I was in Vietnam during that year, I read through my Bible from Genesis to Revelation, just sitting either near a foxhole or in the weeds or in the jungle, just wherever we were, because for the most part we were out in the bush. We were in rare areas sometime, little outposts, and for the most part, we were just out in the bush.
What kind of an impression did that leave on the other men that were with you?
They didn't say, but I noticed, I mean, I was very obvious. There was nobody else sitting around reading a Bible.
Yeah.
And so they knew that I had a walk with Christ. They told me later that their nickname, apparently for me, not to me, was Preach, which is short for preacher. And I'm going, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But but that was it would just be my walk as to how I walked, and probably that I didn't use the same type of language that the rest of them used, and that I was very. One guy, he would come up and sit with me for a while periodically, and he and I didn't have anything else in common, but he'd just come over and sit and talk. And towards the end of the time, he said, "Did you notice I came over and talked to you?" And I said, "Yes, I noticed that." And he said, "Well," he said, you're always the same." He said, "You were really stable." And he said, I'd take drugs. He would take drugs. And he said, when he was coming down, he would come over and talk to me. And he said, "You were always the same." And he could tell where he was as he was coming down off of things by talking to me, which I have no clue how that worked. But
yeah. Okay. So then tell me about, it was February 18th at one point, and the next day was your 21st birthday.
Yes. I'd been in country for about a month and a half, and it was the day before my 21st birthday, and we were getting ready to go on a sweep of the Oshaw Valley, and we were at just a little outpost. There was probably a tent there and an ammo bunker and everything, and so at where we were. And so we were loading up onto the helicopter. The chopper was going to take us out there, and with the mortars, they were very heavy, and so when you have your pack loaded with everything, you can't just lift it up and put it on. So you'd sit down, set your pack on the ground, sit down, put your arms in it, and then roll over onto your stomach, get up on your hands and knees, and then stand up, and then you could walk. So I did that, and we had a new guy with us who was just brand new in country, and he was trying to get his pack on, and so I just dropped mine and went over and pulled him up off the ground. I thought, I'll explain later how you do this. So that made me the last person, and the chopper was waiting on me. So I quickly, as quick as possible, got mine on, got up, started to run towards the chopper, and I tripped on something, and I went down, and the weight of the pack just drove me to the ground. and I was out. I was unconscious long enough that the guys got off the chopper, went and came and got the mortar gear that I had on me or with me that I was carrying, and then got back on the chopper. And about the time I came to, they were lifting off and leaving. So then the guys who were there at the little outpost came out and got the gear off of me. And when they helped me up and I got up, I could see that I dislocated my elbow, and my forearm was completely out of socket. It was halfway up my upper arm. My arm was just sticking out in the air. Wow. And no break in the skin. But and so then there was a doctor who happened to be at the outpost for a little bit, and he says, we have to put that back in place. Ooh. And he said he gave me a shot of morphine and set me down on some sandbags and stood over me and pushed it back into place. And then I was relegated to KP duty for about 4 weeks at a regular rear area base.
Yeah. But before you took this fall, your destination was the helicopter.
Yes.
And you were supposed to get on this helicopter.
That is correct.
And so what happened to those men on the helicopter while you were in KP?
I learned while I was doing KP during that the men who were on that sweep of the valley, they were overrun by the Vietnamese, and most of them died. So it was bad news, and I missed it, and it left me with that question to God, why? Why was I spared? Why was I spared and those other men weren't? And I didn't have an answer other than God was protecting me, He was taking care of me. But that was a question that occurred more than once.
Yeah. So tell me about the next time that happened for you.
Okay. It was a number of months later. Our unit was on this ridge that was kind of a C shape or semicircle with two ends, probably a good quarter mile apart. And whenever we would locate at a place, the radio man would always call in the coordinates of where we were to the rear area so they would know where the friendlies are. And so they had done that. And late that afternoon, there was a unit on one end of the ridge and a unit on the other end of the ridge, like a couple of squads on each end. And the other squads had lost some men, and they needed some more infantry and a mortar person to come over there. So about 4 infantry, then myself, we were sent to walk that ridge all the way to the other end and help resupply the unit at the other side. So early in the morning, before daybreak, where I was now, we could hear all sorts of explosions going on. And once it was daybreak, we realized that the group where I had just come from had been bombed. The coordinates had accidentally got entered in as a bombing mission. So it was a U.S. bombing mission that just wiped out all the squads there, all the people. They were wiped out totally.
At some point, you are given some R&R, and you go to Australia for that?
Yes. You had different choices for R&R. It was a week of rest and relaxation out of Vietnam. And I chose Australia. I figured I'd never, ever be there.
Yeah.
And they spoke English there. So rather than one of the Asian countries where a lot of people went. And so I get to Sydney and around and visited different sites and things that were in Sydney, Australia, and it was very interesting. And a common thing around military bases, or where there's a bunch of military men, is for women, prostitutes they recognize who we were, and they would always come up and say, "Do you want a girl?" So that was a common thing back when I was in Camp Pendleton, whenever I was in Oceanside and other places, that it happened all the time. And so the night before, my last night in Sydney, I went to a dinner theater, and it was about a couple miles from the hotel, and I walked up there. That was like a short distance, and I see this car pull up, and inside a girl is reached over, and she's rolling down the window, and I knew exactly what I was going to hear in just a little bit. And she says, "Do you want a girl?" I said, "No, thank you." And she said, "You heading back to the hotel?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, hop in. I'll give you a ride." And I was just about to say, "No, thank you," when I heard God say, "Get in the car." And I felt this incredible peace of a spirit over me. And so based on that, I decided, okay, I'll get in the car. And I knew what she wanted. She wanted an opportunity to try to swing a business deal,
Right.
Her business. And so we start driving, and so she, of course, is starting to try to do a business deal. And in just a little bit, she surprised me with a statement. She said, "You haven't slept with anyone, have you?" I said, "No, I'm saving myself till I get married." And in my heart, I knew that somehow that hurt her. And because she went silent. She did not say another word. And while we drove, and I appreciated the ride. It was drizzling rain. And we got to the hotel, and I thanked her for the ride. She reached over and took a hold of my arm, and she said, "Don't you change. Don't let anybody talk you into changing." And I knew what she was talking about, and so I reassured her that I wouldn't, and thanked her again for the ride, and then went into the hotel. And as I was walking into the hotel, I thought, "Oh, that's strange. A prostitute encouraging me to stay a virgin. That's different." And so...
Yeah.
And so the next day, I'm on my way back to Vietnam. A few days later, I'm back out in the bush. And I think about the girl in Sydney, and I think, I need to pray for her salvation. So I start praying for her salvation. And so whenever God would put her on my heart, I would pray for her salvation. And then later, I become a dentist, and I'm in practice, and God would periodically bring her to my mind, and I would pray for the Sydney girl's salvation. And then one day I was working on a patient, and God brought her to my mind, and I thought, okay, between patients, when I'm in my office, I'll pray for her salvation. And I get in the office, and I couldn't pray for her, not her salvation. And I'm thinking, that's strange. And then I went back to work. The next day, the same thing happened. I couldn't pray for her salvation. And I go back to work. The third day it happens, I go, okay, there's something going on. I need to talk to God about this. So I figured in the evening, when I have time to talk to God, pray about this, I would. And so I started talking to God about it, and He let me know that the salvation issue was settled. She was a Christian. She had accepted Christ. I go, oh, okay, that's why I couldn't pray for that. And so then I had complete freedom to pray for her with with her life and what was going on. And it was interesting because I wanted to pray for her to join a church and have fellowship and something like life groups and that type of thing. And I would be led away from that in my prayer time very quickly to pray for what's going on, what she's dealing with, what's happening, what all is going on in her life. And so every time I tried to pray for all the other things, I was just led away and to pray for these things. And then but this continued on for maybe 9 months or so, praying for her. And Patsy and I both praying for her. And then one day at the office, God put her on my heart. And so I thought, okay, I'll pray. It was while I was seeing patients, I'll pray for her between patients. And I start to pray, and I'm stopped. And I think, okay, I've been here before. I'm going to have to talk to God this evening. And talk to God, and He let me know that she wasn't walking this earth anymore. She was with Jesus in heaven, and she wasn't needing my prayers any longer. And I thought, this had been going on for almost 43 years since the time that I first met her in Vietnam, in Sydney, and to now in Tulsa, that she is with Jesus, and interesting, an incredible peace came over my heart, over me at that point. And I thought back to when I was getting ready to get in her car, of the peace that I felt then. And it was kind of like bookends, the beginning and the end of her story in my life here on earth.
Yeah.
And so
I love that. I think that's incredible that just a short meeting with her, just a few moments, that you had the faithfulness to continue to pray for her for over 43 years. Yes. And for the Lord to communicate with you those things that she had accepted Christ, and then later on that she is in heaven. And it just makes me think of two things. Of one, us as believers, where prayer is really important, and feeling the nudge from the Holy Spirit to pray for people, we should do that. If the Lord brings people to our mind, then we need to stop and pray for them, because we're fighting a battle, and prayer is part of our toolbox to fight back and to pray for these people. And then it also makes me think of that woman, whatever her name is, the Sydney girl.
The Sydney girl.
Yeah, and at one point in our lives, we were all the Sydney girl. We were all lost. And who knows, when we get to heaven, who we're going to meet that was praying for us for our salvation, that we had no idea that they had been praying for us for years. And so I think that's just a huge encouragement for both the prayer warrior, of knowing that it is important and it is worthwhile to do that, and also for anybody who's going through something, that having people to pray for you is a gift. It's a true gift.
It really is.
Yeah, and I love that story, though.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about what happened going through Vietnam, and then afterwards coming out of Vietnam.
Well, after I came out of Vietnam, since I had a 2-year enlistment, when I got back, I only had a few months left, and so I got an early out. So that meant that I came back in January of 1970, and within a month or two, I was out, and so then went back to Wichita, Kansas, where I was from.
How did you meet Patsy?
I met Patsy in church back in Wichita, as maybe in junior high, high school.
Okay. Wow.
And so I knew her for a number of years. Just a little cute story about meeting her meeting me. We were both in vacation Bible school, and I was just a child, young boy with a water pistol, and
oh no!
And this other boy and I were shooting each other with water pistols. And Patsy she told me about this later, is that she was sitting over to the side doing her craft and thinking, I'm never going to have anything to do with that boy.
That's hilarious.
And so, but eventually we got married. But
yeah.
We got married in June of 71.
Okay.
And in Wichita, we had a son about a year and a half later, and then a daughter about three years after our son.
Yeah.
And so we had a little family there.
Yeah. Tell me about your Vietnam reunion.
Okay, yes, we had a Vietnam reunion. This was several years after Vietnam. Some of the mortar guys were getting together. It was a part of a large Marine Corps reunion that was being held over in Branson. And so we got together, about 6 or 7 of us that were had been in the mortar squad together. And they're talking about different things about Vietnam and battles and stuff like that. And then they started talking about this one battle. Then they said, that was a bad battle. It was very fierce. And I said, I don't remember that one. There were times that we would be parceled out to different squads. So there were times that we weren't all in the same battle. Some people would be in this one, other people would maybe be with a different platoon. So I said, I must have been with another group, another platoon for that battle. And the squad leader there said, no, good, you were there. And I go, I don't remember it at all. And then another man said, you were there. And I said, I don't recall being in that battle that you're talking about, that you're describing. And another man said, you were there. I don't remember anything about that battle. 3 men say I was there. I must have been there, and God just took care of that memory of whatever took place during that battle, because I still have no memory of that. But God taking care of me.
Yeah. Okay, so after you came back and then you got married to Patsy, didn't you at some point think about going to seminary?
Yes, I did, because I was still thinking in terms of going into the ministry. And so I graduated from college there in Wichita, Kansas, after we were married. And so then I was planning on going to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary down in Fort Worth. So I applied, and I stuttered some at that time in my life, and one of my references said he's barely intelligible. Speaking of my speaking ability, and so the seminary turned me down, and so I called them and very carefully, explained who I was and everything, and the lady said, "Well, sounds like you can talk. We will let me get back with you." And so then they accepted me provisionally if I took speech therapy or speech evaluation. And so they accepted me. And so I started the seminary. And at that point, I realized that really wasn't where God was wanting me in the seminary, but that Fort Worth was where I was to be at that point. Since I was there, going to school, I was familiar with home remodeling and with handyman work, so I started a little business doing that, and I got that business going so I could support my family. And while I was there, I started working for some dentists, and I was working in their homes, and then I worked in their offices, and I would talk to them about what they did and the work, and it was just intriguing. And so they said, "Would you like to observe?" And so they had me where I would out and dressed up, suit and shirt and tie, and I would observe them actually working on patients. And I really felt God saying, "This is where I want you." So then I had 2 years of pre-dental sciences to pick up, because with a degree in Bible, you don't have physics and organic chemistry and all those things. So I had to pick up all those before I could even apply for dental school. And I applied to Baylor Dental School, which is in Dallas, and it was accepted. And so that's how I ended up being a dentist.
Yeah.
Going to dental school.
Now, one of the jobs that you had while you were doing the carpentry, you would get a lot of calls, but then there was one particular client that you kept working for a while. Tell us about that.
I had been working for some attorneys, and I started working for this one attorney at the time I started dental school. The freshman year is the hardest as far as academics and homework and stuff like that, because later you're doing more clinical work as well. And so I started working for this one attorney who had a large 3-story house, and I worked there for 9 months, my whole freshman year. I remodeled, painted, wallpapered, did something to basically every room in that house, the outside of the house, built a carport for him. And so that was a huge blessing, because I didn't have to take time to do any bidding. In fact, I didn't notice that I was not doing any bidding whatsoever throughout that whole 9 months. I didn't bid another job. And when I was seeing that I was almost through with that job, I think, I don't have any other jobs lined up. I haven't bid any jobs. The phone hasn't rung. My business has died. And then about that time, the phone started ringing. I got calls to come and bid jobs, and that was just a great blessing, the way God worked that out for me.
The way that he provided for you. So what year was it that you became a dentist then?
I became a dentist in 1979.
Okay.
Graduated from Baylor.
And did you practice in Texas?
I actually practiced in Fort Worth for less than a year. And then in 1980, I moved to Tulsa.
Okay.
There was a dentist whose father was ill. They were both dentists, and he needed somebody to take over his dad's practice, which I came. It was a small practice, but it was a nice start. And we practiced together, the son and myself, for quite a few years, and well, actually until 1998, when he retired and I bought his practice.
Okay, I got you. But then in 1993, something else happened to you. So while you were in Vietnam, there were multiple moments where you could have easily died, where the Lord protected you from either being on that helicopter or changing which ridge you were on, and he was keeping you safe and watching out for you. And so then in 1993, what happened in April?
Well, we had purchased a boat, a small little ski boat for our family for fun. So I went up one Saturday to get it, and as I was bringing it back, and it was just myself, I noticed the weather as I got closer to Tulsa. The weather was looking bad, the storm clouds and everything. And so I was at Catoosa, and I pulled into Bruce's truck stop. And as the weather got worse, and then about that time, the things just started blowing through the air. I could see stuff blowing past the car, and I realized it's a tornado. And so I thought I better roll the windows down. Yeah, too late. The windows just all started disappearing from my car. And so I just laid down across the console, and I could feel the car moving, being jerked around and everything, and lots of noise. And then everything quieted down, and it became very calm. And I thought, it's a very eerie calm. And I thought, but it's over. I made it. And about that time, the wind starts picking up again, and it starts getting tornado-like. And I realized I was in the eye of the tornado. It had just passed over me, and that's why it had stopped. And I thought, Here we go again. And so then there was the second half of the tornado, the backside of it, and I'm just laying across the console. And when it was finally over, I was able to get out of the car. The boat and trailer were gone. They were way out in the field, a long ways away. They had gotten ripped off of the car and way out there. And I walk around, and I'm kind of bloody, but I wasn't paying much attention to it. And there were other cars that were smashed. There were semi-trucks that were caved in. There was a lot of devastation there. There were quite a few people who died in that tornado, and lots of people injured. And it turned out I had a lot of glass embedded in me that I had to have taken out. And I discovered that there was lumber in my car, 2x4s, that I did not have before. And so that meant they blew into the car, and so they could have hit me and could have killed me. But God spared me again, took care of me.
Yeah.
And again, the question was, why? Why was I spared? Other people at that truck stop were not.
Yeah. And didn't somebody you knew showed up?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was walking around, and I saw this man who I knew, and I look at him and I say, "What are you doing here?" And he asked me the same question. He said he was a tornado chaser, and that he had followed the tornado out there, and so there was no telephone or cell phone usage right then, and he said, I can patch a phone call in to Patsy with his radio to the sheriff's office, and then a telephone call to Patsy to let her know that you're here, but you're fine. You'll be home later, much later. And so he called and told her that. And so when I got home, I was able to drive the car home. It had a windshield, and that was all. But I drove home. I walk into the house, and Patsy looks at me, and she says, "Turn around." So I turned around and my back was facing her, and she goes, "Take your shirt off." So I did that, and I hear her gasp, and I thought, oh, that doesn't sound good. But apparently I was all cut up, and she was an RN. She had become a nurse before we got married, and so she knew what she was looking at.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Tell me a little bit about Danny. Who's Danny?
Danny was a cousin of mine, maybe a couple years younger, and he lived in San Diego. And I had met him before, just in family get-togethers, but didn't really know him that well. But when I would, once I was out of boot camp and out of infantry training, I went to visit with his parents. His dad I knew, and visited them a few times, and in San Diego. And Danny was a surfer, and he lived the surfing life out on the beach, and so he was gone most of the time. When I would see him, it would be like, "Hi, Danny," "Bye, Danny," and he was gone with his high school friends. And then after Vietnam, I came back and got to go down to San Diego to visit his parents a few times, and met him a couple of times, but never really spent much time because he was always busy doing things, and which was fine. Then several years after Patsy and I were married, I get a letter from him saying that he had become a Christian. Mm-hmm. And he said the biggest factor in his becoming a Christian was what he saw in me. He said, "You didn't change." He said, "You went to Vietnam and you came back the same." He said he had friends who were all messed up when they came back from Vietnam. And he said, "You were the same." Now, myself, I knew that I had changed. Vietnam was an experience that changes a person, but as far as my Christian walk, it didn't change. So, wow. So he became a Christian. That was a nice thing to hear from him.
Yeah. Now, throughout your time being a dentist in Tulsa, where did you guys land for church?
We moved from Fort Worth to Tulsa. We visited a couple of churches, and then we started going to this other church, Woodland Acres, and we were there for a few years. We lost our pastor, and we called a young pastor from Dallas, and he came to be our pastor there at at the church. And his name was Michael Gabbert. And shortly after he came, I realized that God was using him very much so. And I could see what he was doing within the church and within his ministry. And I would talk to God and say, "I want to be a part of what you're doing with Michael. Mm-hmm. What can I do?" And God said, "I want you to pray for him." And I said, "Well, I am praying for him. So what can I do?" And he said, "I want you to pray for Michael." I said, "Oh, yes, and I do. But what can I do? I'm a doing person. I like doing things." And finally, God convinced me, what I want you to do is pray for Michael. And then God even let me know he wanted a commitment from me that I was going to pray as he directed, that I would pray for Michael. And so that was what I started doing regularly, was praying for Michael. And whenever God would put Michael on my heart in the daytime, I would, even if I was at the office, I'd pray for him. Mm-hmm. And God would even wake me up at night at times and wake me up, and I'd know I'm to pray for Michael, and I'd get out of bed and go and pray for him. Sometimes it was the middle of the night. Interesting, there were a few times when it was happened to be close to a time I saw Michael again, I'd say, "Were you up at 2:00 in the morning the other day?" And he goes, "Yeah, I was." And I go, "I thought so."
Because so are you.
Yeah, so was I.
Wow.
And so there were multiple times that I was praying for Michael, and I didn't I usually did not know what, because Michael didn't talk to me about pray for this or pray for that, but just God would have me praying for him, and still do. So we've been doing that since that time until now.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because eventually, Michael started Evergreen, and you and your wife decided to join him in that.
Right. When we heard that Michael was starting Evergreen, we followed him and was there at the very first service, and have been regular members ever since then, doing different things. And though Patsy had a stroke in 2015. And she was paralyzed on one side, and the doctors and the nurses all thought that she was going to die, but she didn't. God spared her, and she slowly got better. She was doing quite well for the next couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and then she gradually started a downhill slope. And just got worse. She'd get a little better, and then something else would happen. She'd get worse, and it was just a gradual downhill slope until finally she passed away in December of 2020. And it was December 21st. And also on December 21st, I was diagnosed with COVID. And so that meant I was quarantined to my house. Patsy had died there in the house, but they came and took her body. So I was left there. I couldn't visit anyone. No one could come to visit me. I was just there. And
that's awful.
And God took care of me. He comforted me in many ways that were just surprising, but yet he took care of me and comforted me during that time until I gradually got better and got stronger, and later was back at work, and he has helped me throughout this time of dealing with her loss. And God's been very good to me throughout all these years.
Yeah. What I notice about your testimony is how much of a faithful prayer warrior you are, and how Christianity, not that it's easy for you, but that you have had a faith from childhood that has sustained you your whole life. And people have noticed that about you. And you've just been faithful to pray for people that the Lord brings to mind. And God saved you many times for a reason. One great reason was so that you and Patsy could get married and have your children. Other reasons were for you to be able to pray for others. Sydney Girl being one of them, Michael being another, and also just the way that you impacted people's lives, of how they saw you be able to handle the trauma of Vietnam, and Danny coming to the Lord, and just your faithful walk with Christ as a witness to him. And so there was definitely a reason why he saved you those many times. So with your life of prayer, what might you say to somebody who wants to know how to be a better prayer warrior for the Lord?
Of an obedience to God as to how He's directing in your prayer life, and realizing that prayer is a powerful thing. At first, I thought it was like, you're just talking to God. You're talking to an invisible person that you don't see, and you're just talking to the air. But it's not that way. Prayer is very, very important, but it's very strong, very powerful thing that affects lives. And just how it does, now that I don't know. I wonder on that, but it's a very powerful thing, and just praying as God leads you, even in ways that may seem unusual or you don't understand. But if God is directing, He has a reason.
Yeah. And what might you say to somebody that wants to be a faithful follower of Christ, but their life, there's been moments in their life that they don't know why God is doing something in a certain way. Maybe they've also had near-death experiences where they were the ones that survived and other people haven't. But what might you want to say to somebody who is battling with why God is doing something particular in their life?
We don't know why we sometimes have these experiences, and like a lot of things, I didn't know why I went through those things, but I knew that God was with me no matter what was happening, and I just had to put my trust in God that He was going to take care of me, even though I couldn't see the outcome or the why and how this was going to work out. But yet I knew that God was there. He was taking care of me, and that I just wanted to be a part of what He was doing.
Well, thank you so much for coming on The Grove and being willing to share your story with us today. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you would like more information about our church, please visit our website at evergreenbc.org.